Stop. Right now. Stop scrolling. Stop pretending you accidentally landed here. You didn't. Something in you, something older than your name, older than your wounds, guided you to this exact moment. And what I am about to tell you is not something you can afford to hear tomorrow. Stay with me. If this is reaching something inside you, something you have carried for a long time and never had words for, save this. Share it with the person you know is standing in their own ruins right now. Because the next part of this message is the part that will change how you move through the rest of your life. There is a dimension of your inner life that does not operate on schedules, intentions, or rational plans. It moves the way water moves, not by force, but by finding the exact shape of whatever container it encounters. You have experienced this. A song plays and suddenly you are weeping for a loss you thought you had finished grieving years ago. A stranger says one unremarkable sentence and something in you shifts permanently. You read a line in a book at 30 that you read at 20, and this time it breaks you open completely. The words did not change. You did. This is not coincidence, and it is not mysticism. It is the nature of depth. The deeper layers of the human psyche operate on a completely different economy than the surface mind. The surface mind measures time in calendars and deadlines. The deeper self measures time in readiness. And readiness is not something you manufacture. It is something that arrives, often without warning, almost always without your permission. This is why the right message at the wrong moment slides off you without leaving a mark. You have been told the truth before and not heard it. Someone who loved you named exactly what was happening, and you nodded politely and went on living the same way for another 3 years. The truth was present. You were not yet present to the truth. There is a profound difference between those two things, and most people spend their lives confusing them. The deeper self is not waiting for the perfect moment in the way a planner waits for the right meeting slot. It is waiting for the threshold, the precise point at which the old structure has become so unbearable that the new one finally has room to enter. Pain, loss, failure, exhaustion. These are not punishments. They are the conditions under which something that could not previously reach you finally can. The message was always there. You are only now able to receive it. There is a moment in every genuine transformation where everything you have carefully constructed, your identity, your certainty, your sense of how the story was supposed to go, comes apart in your hands. And in that moment, the mind does what it was trained to do. It calls this catastrophe. It calls this failure. It reaches for every piece of evidence that confirms you are broken, that something has gone irreversibly wrong, that the life you were building has been stolen from you. But the psyche knows something the frightened mind refuses to accept. It knows that collapse and creation are not opposites. They are sequential. One must precede the other with an almost biological necessity, the way winter must exhaust itself before the ground can receive anything new. Crisis strips away what was never truly yours to begin with. The relationship that ended was not your wholeness. It was your avoidance of it. The career that collapsed was not your identity. It was the costume your fear dressed you in because the real work felt too exposed, too uncertain, too much like actually being seen. The version of yourself that broke down was not you. It was the performance of you, and performances have a natural lifespan. When they end, it feels like death because you have confused the actor with the soul wearing them. What makes the doorway terrifying is that you cannot see what is on the other side while you are still standing in the frame. You only feel the cold, the disorientation, the vertigo of no longer knowing who you are without the structures that previously defined you. That feeling is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that something is going right for perhaps the first time in a very long time. The people who emerge from genuine crisis are not the same people who entered it. They are larger. They carry a gravity and a tenderness that comfort alone could never produce. Crisis did not diminish them. It finished them. Somewhere beneath the version of you that learned to be agreeable, the version that learned to be small, the version that learned to want only what seemed safely achievable, there is something that has never stopped moving toward wholeness. It does not rest. It does not negotiate with your fear. It does not accept the compromises your survival instincts made on its behalf. It simply continues, with a patience that borders on the eternal and a pressure that, if ignored long enough, becomes impossible to contain. This is not ambition. Ambition lives on the surface and wants recognition. What lives underneath wants something far less glamorous and far more essential. It wants you to become the full-dimensioned human being you were configured to be before the world began editing you. Before you learned which parts of yourself made people uncomfortable, before you started shrinking certain rooms of your inner life and nailing the doors shut because keeping them open felt too costly. The tragedy is not that this force exists. The tragedy is how creatively and exhaustingly most people work to suppress it. They fill the silence with noise because silence is where it speaks most clearly. They choose certainty over meaning because meaning requires them to move into territory their current identity cannot map. They surround themselves with people who confirm who they have been because who they are becoming feels too unfamiliar to defend in conversation, and still it moves. It surfaces in the recurring dream you have never fully examined. It appears in the inexplicable grief you feel when you watch someone else live the life you quietly gave up on. It speaks in the irritability that descends when you spend too long being someone you are not. These are not random disturbances. They are dispatches from the deepest part of your architecture, insisting that the unfinished work has not been cancelled simply because you stopped showing up for it. The self does not abandon the project. It only waits for you to stop abandoning it. The human mind, when faced with loss, does something almost automatic and almost always wrong. It reads ending as conclusion. It looks at what is burning and sees only what is being lost, never pausing long enough to ask what the fire was sent to clear. This is understandable. Pain is not a patient teacher, and grief does not arrive with a note attached explaining its larger purpose. It arrives as pure weight, and under that weight, the longer view becomes nearly impossible to hold. But there is a pattern woven through every genuine human transformation that once you learn to recognize it, changes the entire way you read your own story. What looks like destruction at the level of the surface is almost always construction at the level of the depth. The marriage that ended freed something in you that the marriage, for all its comfort, was quietly suffocating. The business that failed burned away an identity you had outgrown but lacked the courage to shed voluntarily. The friendship that dissolved removed a mirror that was only showing you who you used to be, when what you needed was the discomfort of facing who you had not yet become. Nature understood this long before human beings had language for it. The forest fire that appears catastrophic from the outside is, at the level of the soil, a renovation. It clears the canopy that was blocking light from reaching the ground. It returns decades of accumulated matter back into nutrients. It makes possible a density and diversity of new growth that the old, overcrowded forest could never have supported. The destruction was not the enemy of the life beneath. It was its condition. Your losses carry this same intelligence, even when they feel purely random, even when they feel cruel, even when no meaning is immediately visible. The things that have fallen apart in your life were not falling apart despite something larger trying to happen. They were falling apart because something larger was trying to happen. What is collapsing is making room for what is coming. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you have worked or how little you have slept. It is the exhaustion of perpetually being only a portion of who you are, of moving through your days wearing a self that was assembled from other people's comfort rather than your own truth, of speaking in a register that keeps the peace rather than the one that keeps faith with what you actually know, feel, and carry inside you. Most people do not arrive at this fragmentation through a single dramatic betrayal of themselves. It happens incrementally, almost tenderly, across years of small surrenders. You learned early which version of you received warmth and which version made the room go quiet. So you developed the warmth-receiving version with great discipline and left the rest largely unattended. You became fluent in acceptability, and the parts of you that did not fit the acceptable template, the anger, the hunger, the grief, the wildness, the specific shape of your longing, did not disappear. They went underground. They became the unlived life. And the unlived life does not stay silent. It cannot. It has too much energy and nowhere sanctioned to put it. so it surfaces sideways. In the chronic dissatisfaction you cannot quite name, in the envy you feel toward people who seem to be living with their whole chest, in the numbness that descends when you achieve something you were supposed to want and feel almost nothing upon arrival. These are not character flaws. They are the suppressed portions of your wholeness, pressing against the walls of the container you have built to keep them manageable. The pain you carry is in large part the pain of your own unlived possibilities. It is the ache of the musician who became an accountant not from genuine calling, but from fear of genuine calling. It is the weight of the words never written, the love never fully expressed, the self never fully permitted. You were not made to live as a fraction of yourself. There is a particular lie that the comfortable life tells you with enormous consistency and almost no resistance from you whatsoever. It tells you that there is time, that the conversation you need to have can happen after things settle, that the life you actually want to live can begin once the current obligations thin out, once the children are older, once the financial situation stabilizes, once you feel more ready, once the conditions more closely resemble the ones you have decided are necessary before your real life is permitted to start. This lie is not malicious. It is, in its own way, kind. It wraps postponement in the language of wisdom and calls delay a form of preparation. It dresses procrastination in responsible clothing and presents it as patience. And because it sounds reasonable, because it has the texture of maturity, you accept it. You accept it once, and then again, and then it becomes the organizing principle of your entire relationship with your own becoming. But urgency, genuine urgency, the kind that rises from the deepest part of your inner life rather than from anxiety or external pressure, is not panic. It is precision. It is the soul's accurate measurement of what is actually at stake when a life that could be fully lived is instead spent largely in rehearsal for a living that never quite begins. The soul knows things the comfortable mind refuses to calculate. It knows that time is not a renewable resource dressed up as one. It knows that the version of you capable of certain experiences, certain connections, certain creations exists within a window. And windows, unlike intentions, do not stay open indefinitely. Every day spent in a life too small for your actual depth is not a neutral day. It is a day in which something that could only be expressed through you goes unexpressed permanently, not postponed, not rescheduled, gone in the specific form it could only have taken in that particular unrepeatable day of your particular unrepeatable life. Urgency is not your enemy. Comfortable delay is. There is a subject you change when it comes up. Perhaps it arrives in conversation and you redirect smoothly, almost professionally, with a fluency that tells you this particular avoidance has been practiced for a long time. Perhaps it surfaces in solitude, in the quiet between tasks, in the last few minutes before sleep, and you reach immediately for your phone, for noise, for anything that will occupy the space before the thought can fully form. You know the subject. You do not need it named. The fact that something in you just moved, just slightly tightened, just performed that small internal step backward is the name. This is not weakness. It is a deeply human response to genuine threat. But the threat is not what you believe it to be. The discomfort you feel when that subject approaches is not evidence that engaging with it will destroy you. It is evidence of how much unprocessed truth lives inside it. Discomfort of that specific quality, the kind that has your own fingerprints on it, the kind that feels distinctly personal rather than generally unpleasant, is always pointing at something that matters profoundly to your wholeness. Pain that has no relevance to your becoming does not feel like that. It simply hurts. But the pain of avoidance carries a specific signature. It feels like ownership, like something that belongs to you and is waiting to be claimed. The subjects we avoid longest are the ones that hold the most concentrated version of what we have not yet integrated about ourselves. The anger you will not examine is telling you precisely where your boundaries were violated and never defended. The grief you will not sit with is holding the shape of something you loved honestly enough to lose. The dream you dismiss before anyone else can dismiss it for you is the most accurate portrait of your unlived potential that you have ever produced. What owns you quietly controls everything. What you face begins, finally, to answer to you. There is something in you that has always known this, even when the evidence of your life seemed to argue otherwise. Even in the years of contraction, even during the seasons when surviving felt like the only available ambition, even when the distance between who you were and who you sensed you could be felt so vast it seemed cruel to measure it. Something in you never fully accepted the smaller version as the final one. That refusal was not delusion. It was the most honest and most reliable thing about you. The smallness you have been living inside was not your original shape. It was the shape the world pressed you into through accumulated pressure, through criticism absorbed before you had the defenses to question its source, through love that was conditional on your compliance, through systems that rewarded your output and ignored your depth, through the simple and devastating arithmetic of belonging, which taught you that certain parts of yourself were the price of admission into the rooms where warmth lived. You paid that price so many times, it began to feel like your natural economy. You forgot that you set the original terms under duress. But the original self does not forget what it was before the pressing began. It carries the memory of its own dimensions the way a compressed spring carries the memory of its full extension. The tension you feel, that restlessness, that persistent sense that something essential remains unlaunched in you, is not ingratitude for what you have. It is structural. It is the difference between the life you are living and the life your full nature requires making itself felt in the only language available to it. Darkness, when it comes, is not your ceiling. It is the necessary condition of certain kinds of growth that cannot happen in comfort, cannot happen in the light of constant approval, cannot happen anywhere except in the private, pressurized interior of a life being asked to expand beyond what it previously believed possible. You were made for the full-dimensioned thing. Nothing less will ever feel like enough.